Up next, it's going to be Benjamin, and he's going to tell us about why he's both a lefty and a royalist.
Yeah. Do you know, I've been tweeting about this since the Queen passed, and I posted lots of remarks about how much she meant to me, as she did so many others. And in the past few days, I've had lots of people saying, how can you be on the left and be a monarchist? Well, for me, it's easy. It's straightforward, because you look at countries like America. When they do pomp and ceremony, and they also do it quite well, it'll be all about a politician or a policy or a version of America. It is, by definition, a divisive occasion because you're celebrating what half of the country liked and what the other half didn't like. And for me, as someone on the left, I believe in the commune, in sharing, in people being able to come together. And what I've found so moving in the last couple of days, especially at a time like we have at the moment, when things really are pretty gloomy for a lot of people and it doesn't feel like the country's generally in a great place. When I was going through the streets of London and there was bunting up and flags and the pubs were busier than usual, and before it started pouring down today, there were people out in the park celebrating. You know, where I work, opposite Kensington Palace, was suddenly covered with people, many of them American, many of them from other countries, coming here to celebrate something. And when they were waving that flag, it wasn't a controversy, it wasn't a criticism of part of our culture, it was just a celebration of who we are. And for me, as someone on the left, I think something that, in a time when we're so divided by social class and politics and politicians, you know, we support different football teams and watch different TV channels, but the vast majority of us come together on a day like this. And I think it's a moment when communities and families feel like they're on the same page. So look, as a lefty, if I were designing a country from scratch, the idea of saying one bloke was chosen by God and his family must rule for 1,000 years, yeah, it would sound a bit silly. But in reality, I think it's something very, very special, and we'd regret losing it.
Goodness me, tear to the eye, Benjamin. God, there'll be people at home crying. Pass me a tissue. That was so sweet. I love that.
I think, you know, it's often, I think, people have a family connection about that. I don't know whether any of you sort of feel that sense of continuity in your own lives as well as sort of the things that you watch on the telly today.
Hugely. I mean, my grandma, Elizabeth, she might be watching, is, of course, named after the Queen, the then Princess Elizabeth, and she comes from a left-wing Labour voting family, although she voted Tory in 2019. But what I would say to lefties who are against the monarchy is there is a huge and long-standing tradition of left-wing monarchism. And actually, there was that rumour that the Queen herself, some of her favourite prime ministers, were actual Labour prime ministers rather than Tory prime ministers. So this idea that you can't be a left-wing monarchist and you've got to be a Republican is nonsense.
But I think that's the fault of the modern left, and there's a key distinction here. I think the modern left is very, very obsessed with dividing people massively. I mean, you only have to look at the idea that people are now looking at that royal balcony, aren't they, and go, oh, there's a terrifying amount of white people on it. Yeah, they are a family of white people, obviously. And the left, I think, focuses so much on this ridiculous race ideology, and the royal family is white. They also absolutely, unashamedly hate wealth. Why? Because they're jealous. They're just absolutely jealous. And so the idea that people are surprised that people on the left can actually like the monarchy is the fault of the left and the left alone.
And Benjamin, what do you actually say to people like that then? What do you say to people who say, oh, well, it's absolutely ridiculous that we've got a head of state from a non-diverse family? Apparently, you know, the idea of this family all being white is a negative thing to certain pockets of the identity-obsessed left, of which you are one.
I mean, thanks, you flatter me, but I remember in the days after the Queen passed, last September, and there were photos that cropped up of her and the late Prince Philip dancing in, you know, mixed-race dance partnerships back in the 1950s. Now, back then, a lot of people really were quite racist in this country and in many others in different directions. And the idea that our head of state was doing that back then would have been massively progressive. And so, you know, I think you should celebrate things like that.
Benjamin, I wish you'd have a conversation with some of the left, because they seem to have so much hatred for the monarchy, and it spills over into what I see as a hatred of some British people as well, if not Britain itself, because and the desire to also bring it down for other people. You know, you have the likes of Owen Jones posting on the day of the coronation a big video about why we need to abolish the monarchy. You have people like Kevin Maguire making a whole thing, song and dance about how he's on holiday and got nothing to do with the coronation, ha ha ha. It seems quite spiteful. They can't seem to understand why anyone would enjoy such a spectacle and why anyone would believe in a monarchy. It's so snobby.
But can I put that back, and can I put this to you, Darren? You know, Lee Anderson...
I didn't even ask the question.
The vice chair of the Tory party, he tweeted today, I think rather spitefully, that people who aren't monarchists should emigrate. They should leave the country if they don't like the monarchy. That's what he wrote. Don't you think that kind of attitude is pretty unacceptable?
I think he's saying to the pockets of the left who are seeking to denigrate and destroy British tradition, to turn round to those of us who believe in those traditions, of which you are one, and tell them that what they have is nothing. What they have, which is what people have fought for 1,000 years of history, right? The kings and queens of this country are all part of the rich tapestry of our nation's history. That is a beautiful thing. He is saying that those pockets of the left... No, I'm not
to tell Republicans to emigrate because you disagree with them.
If you genuinely and passionately hate Britain and everything it stands for, then what are you doing here?
He was telling Republicans to leave the country.
No, he's telling people that hate this country.
I don't think as an elected politician, Deputy Chairman of the Tory
Well, don't vote
party,
for him then.
You're telling people to emigrate because you disagree with them.
But it is quite funny when people say, not my king, when just by virtue of living in this country, unfortunately, he is your king.
You know, I actually think there is a fair bit of racism going about at the minute, and I think it's anti-British racism, actually, a lot of the time. People love to line up and say, oh, there's no such thing as British culture. I'm sorry, what did we see today? I find that personally offensive. There is very much British culture, and it is amongst the finest and most refined in the world. We saw all the history there on display today. We saw the pageantry, we saw the pomp and the ceremony and the hymns and everything dating back to a rich tapestry of Britain and British culture. And when people turn a blind eye to that and throw crass remarks out there about how there aren't any differently coloured faces on the royal balcony or things like along those lines, I actually find that personally offensive. And I think a lot of people do find that very, very offensive, and we shouldn't be shy about saying that.
Also, it's so unfortunate because I had the pleasure of walking up and down the Mall, although I'm sure Patrick spent more hours out there than me, but there was a total diversity of people there, people from all over the world, people coming from Australia, African nations, the Caribbean, America, all over the world coming to see this spectacle. They don't look at that balcony and think, oh, it's a bit white.
So, Benjamin, then, how do you respond to your friends and allies when they say that actually this is a grotesque amount of money that's being spent at a time when, as you've been arguing time in, time out, you need a Labour government to spend more of taxpayer money on benefits and all the rest of it? I mean,
look, Darren,
where's that money going?
I don't think anyone could spend more money than Liz Truss did, so she's going to beat any future Labour government at that point. But you know what? You know, when those people make the argument that there are people living in food banks while there is a bloke in a diamond, posh hat, that's not a ridiculous comment. That is an objective assessment of the country we're in. But my point is that I think... And Patrick almost made a good point, and that's as good a compliment. It's as good a compliment as he's going to get from me. Is that we divide ourselves in so many different ways, and it is a whole industry now. People revel in their division rather than unity. No, I think it cuts a lot of different ways, actually. I think you're deluding yourself if you don't think that, Darren. And so when we think about what is British culture, what is that British identity, and this is a question that's been going on since, for some decades now, at least the 20 years I've been politically conscious. And I think that when you see something like today, it is one of those very few things that brings the vast majority of people together. And when these senior members of the Royals have got 70+% support, ain't no politician getting that, not even Penny Mordaunt.
Also, just the fact that people assume that if we tore it down, we'd be in a better place. They have absolutely no evidence to suggest that we would be any way better off. But what we could have lost would be so vast. It's almost hard to imagine.
Also, the argument about pomp and pageantry costing a lot of money is nonsense. It's almost like you're saying Germany and America don't do pomp and pageantry, even though they're republics. I mean, of course we'd still do pomp and pageantry. It just wouldn't be as special as what we saw today.
Just quickly as well, for the argument for getting rid of them as heads of state would actually cost us loads, because they would then just retain all of the profits that the royal estate makes. And that is vast, actually. So that would make arguably the royal family even wealthier than they are now, and the taxpayer even worse off than they are now.
Well, there you go. You can be left-wing and also a monarchist. That's nice to hear. Good stuff.